Hello and welcome to Gaggia TV. What we're going to be doing today is we're running through the test mode for our Velasca machine. As with all of the test modes for our machines, what this does is it isolates each individual mechanism inside here and allows you to use those individually, which can diagnose some of the problems that you're having. We're also going to be running through some of the common problems you might have with your Velasca machine and also how you can troubleshoot those kinds of things. The very first thing that you want to do is check that you've got some beans in the hopper up here and that you've got a full tank of water. That will enable us to run through all of the different bits of the test mode in one go. To access the test mode, what you do is you're going to turn on the Velasca machine, and when you do, you need to hold down Espresso and Menu. Now, depending on the model of Velasca that you have, there will either be a switch here at the back, or you're actually going to have to physically plug the machine in while you're holding these down. So you get the plug from behind here, hold these two buttons down, and plug the machine in like that. And as it turns on, you should see something that you're not familiar with. You shouldn't get the thermometer that you get normally. What you're going to get is a screen that says FW, and this tells you that you entered the test mode. The numbers and things might change depending on what batch number of machine you have or what area you have. So if you're in Europe or the United States, then the voltage and the hertz will be different on the front. But apart from that, you should see an introductory screen. What we're going to do is we're going to cycle through each layer of the test mode, which will use the different parts of the machine, and unlike other Gaggia machines, the Velasca actually uses the steam button to cycle through the different layers of the test mode. So to go to the first layer, what we're going to do is push steam. So now we're at the keyboard level of the test mode, and what you can do here is push each individual key and the machine will tell you whether or not it's registering the input from that. So if you push the Espresso key, it tells you that key number 1 is on. Espresso Lungo is key number 2. Aroma Strength is key number 3. Steam is key number 4, but we're not going to press that right now because if we push steam, remember that cycles through each level of the test mode. So if we push steam right now, what we do is we cycle to the next level of the test mode. So we're going to skip over steam for now, but we already know that button's working because we've managed to get to this level of the test mode, so that's okay. If you push hot water, number 5 comes up, menu is number 6, and the standby button is number 7. There are no buttons 8 and 9, don't worry about those. What we're going to do now is push steam to access the next level of the test mode. The next stage of the test mode is the input section, and what this does is it tests the various sensors that there are on board the machine. There are 4 different ones. There's one to test for water, which is labelled H2O on the screen. There's one to test whether or not the dump box is present, and that's labelled DREG on the screen. There's one to test whether the door is open or not, and then there's one that's labelled BUP, which, as all Gaggia machines have, that means Brew Unit Present, to test whether or not the brew unit is actually there. The very first one we're going to test is the water, and you do that by taking out your full water tank. Hold it in your hand and you should see that the letter changes from Y to N to tell you that there is no water in there. When we put that back in, it should change back to Y again. If it doesn't move, if it stays at Y even when you've got the tank out, it might be that there's dampness inside your machine somewhere. So if you take a dry cloth and wipe out the inside of the water container, wipe out where it was just inside here, then you might fix that particular sensor there. The dump box one we're going to test by taking out the dump box just here. We hold that in our hand and it should change from Y to N to say that there is no dump box present. Then we're going to test the door. To do that, we open the door, put the drag box back in, and it should now say door equals N for the door being open. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to take out the brew unit to test whether or not the brew unit present sensor works. To take out the brew unit on a Velasca machine, you have to make sure that the drag tray is out, and then you can take it out by removing this grey piece of plastic and pulling it out yourself. Then close everything back up to make sure that the sensors are working fine, because at the moment if you have this in this configuration you'll see that door equals N, BUP equals N, drag equals N. So we'll just check that all the sensors work individually. Put the little grey piece of plastic in, close the door, put the drag tray back in, and you should see that everything is Y except for BUP. And again, you're holding it in your hand so everything's alright. BUP equals N. Put everything back, and then we can go to the next stage of the test mode. The next level of the test mode, which we accessed by pushing steam, is the one to do with the brew unit. And what this is going to do is it's going to check whether or not the brew unit can move through its entire range of motion. If there's an obstruction in your machine, you should have already seen it. You've taken out the brew unit in the previous part of the test mode and put it back in. You should have already seen any obstruction that's there. But it may be that the full range of motion is not being accessed because you haven't lubricated your brew unit properly. If that's the case, then you can use the lubricant that came with the machine, and in a later video we're going to look at how you lubricate brew units properly. Otherwise you can just give the whole thing a good clean in warm soapy water. We're now at a screen that says BU, and in order to move the brew unit backwards and forwards, we're going to hold espresso to move it to the work mode. This moves the brew unit all the way forwards, ready to dispense coffee, and when the machine stops making a noise, what you should see is that work now equals Y. To get it to move all the way back to the home position, ready to receive ground coffee, what you're going to do is hold espresso lungo, and that you should again hear the brew unit move, and it's moving all the way to the back of the machine, and it will now be ready to receive ground coffee. For the next level of the test mode, we're going to test the pump. So we actually need the brew unit in its work position. So final thing to do is to hold espresso and move the brew unit all the way forwards. As always with the Velasca, we're now going to push the steam button to access the next level of the test mode. So the next level of the test mode tests two things. It tests the electrovalve and the pump. The electrovalve is the device inside the machine that decides whether or not the water is going to go through the espresso nozzles at the front here to make coffee, or the steam arm here to either make hot water or steam. When the electrovalve is off, that means that the water is going to come through the espresso nozzles at the front here, and if you push espresso, you can toggle the electrovalve between off and on. When it's labelled on, the water is going to go through the steam arm. When it's labelled off, the water is going to come through the espresso nozzles just here. When you push espresso, you should hear a click inside the machine as the valve goes from one to another. If you don't hear that click, or you're not able to do this, that does mean there's a fault with your electrovalve, and you can give us a call. The number is down in the description for the UK. You also want to test whether or not your pump works, and in order to do that, the first way we're going to use this is that the electrovalve is labelled off, and then we hold down hot water to activate the pump. And that will push water through the espresso nozzles of the machine. It's okay if it takes 10 or 15 seconds to do that. When you let go, it stops. It's all right if it takes 10 or 15 seconds for the water to come through. That's because the espresso lines are quite thin. It's a long way back from the pump, so it does sometimes take some time to come through the machine. If no water comes through at all in your espresso nozzles, that does mean you've got a blockage. You can solve this either by degreasing your machine, which we will talk about in a later video, or you can solve it by unblocking it yourself. And the way to unblock it yourself is to very, very gently, as with all our machines, treat them with care. Very gently take some pipe cleaners and try and coax out some of the coffee oils from the espresso nozzles at the front here, but please, please do be careful with that. Where the water should come out pretty quickly is your steam arm. If you turn the electrovalve to on and then hold down hot water, you should pretty much instantly get water out of the front. That shouldn't take too long. If it does take too long, then you have got a blockage somewhere. It could be a scale buildup inside your machine. One of the ways to combat that is to put the descaling solution into your water holder, dilute it as per the manufacturer's instructions, and then go to this level of the test mode and run the electrovalve and the pump and oscillate between off and on with the electrovalve. This might run through some descaling solution and dislodge some of the scale that's built up on your electrovalve, because it does get quite warm and water evaporates off the top. This is sort of a last resort if you can't get anything else to work and you've descaled the machine and still no water is coming through, but it does sometimes work. So you'll be holding down hot water and changing the electrovalve from off to on to off. We're going to access the next level of the test mode by pushing steam. The next level of the test mode tests the heater and the grinder, and in order to test the heater, you're going to hold down espresso lungo, and when you hold that down, you should see that the heater changes from off to on and the temperature starts to rise. You don't want to hold that down for very long. You just want to check that the heater goes from off to on, because you're overriding the safety thermostats inside the machine, and if you overheat the boiler, then that can break the machine, so be very careful with that. The second way that you're going to test in this particular mode is by toggling the grinder, and when you push hot water, that will turn the grinder on, and when you push it again, it will turn it off. You don't want it to run very long because, as you remember, currently we've got the brew unit in the work position, which means that it's not ready to accept the grounds of coffee. So you're actually just sprinkling grounds of coffee somewhere inside your machine, which you will have to go and clean up later. So we don't want the grinder running for very long. So we're going to push hot water for on, and then push it to turn it off again. You should be able to verify that these things work. It's not a very common fault to have these things, the heater and the grinder, not working. If they aren't working, that's not really something you can fix at home again, so give us a ring on the number that's down in the description. We're going to move to the next stage of the test mode by pushing the steam button. This particular mode actually says auto doses, and there's nothing to do here. What this is it's the pre-programmed numbers that the machine has for the different strengths of coffee, and the numbers that you see actually are to do with the rotations of the grinder. Don't worry about that. We're just going to access the next level of the test mode by pushing steam, which should finish it. We should now be back at the original screen that you saw. It says FW Intelia V2 and then some numbers which are to do with your batch number and where you bought the machine. We've got one final job to do, and that is to go back to the brew unit level of the test mode and hold down espresso lungo. What we're going to do is we're going to move the brew unit all the way to the home position, because that's where the machine expects the brew unit to be when it turns on. It's not a disaster if you forget to do that. The machine will usually move the brew unit back to the home position by itself, but it's just a good habit to get into. So we're done. We've finished the test mode. You want to verify that everything's working by turning off the power at the back of your machine, which, remember, depending on your version of the machine, will either be with a flip button or it will be just by unplugging the machine. Ours is an unplug. And then you turn everything back on, and you should just make sure that you get back to the screen you expect to, which should be the thermometer when you turn the machine on using the standby button, and the machine just gently heats itself up. If you've got any problems or questions, leave a comment down below, contact us on social media, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and enjoy your coffee.